Does fish oil actually impair brain injury recovery? That's what this new study that I'm about to talk to you about is claiming. Let's go take a look. My name is Dr. Paul Hrkal. I work a lot with concussions, founder of the Concussion Fix program and scientific advisor for Aqua Omega. Okay, so these are some of the headlines. Fish oil may be hurting your brain, new study finds. I think the news cycle really loves things that are going to be catchy and controversial, and this is exactly what these headlines are showing. So anybody that doesn't really understand fish oils and doesn't really understand maybe some of the mechanisms behind concussion recovery might say, hold on here, I thought this was good for concussions. I thought fish and omega-3s have been shown and linked to better outcomes, and that's exactly why this study absolutely piqued my interest. Let's take a closer look to see what this study is actually all about and if it actually says and claims what the title actually suggests. Okay, so EPA, eicosanopentanoic acid, that is one of the main active ingredients that you'll see inside fish oil, along with DHA, deoxyhexanoic acid. And so if you look at the label, you'll see these two big main active ingredients. And this study was in animals. They fed one group fish oil plus a high-fat diet, and then they just fed a control diet, which is also high in fat. And so it was done in animal models. So obviously we have to take everything with a grain of salt. The ability to translate this into humans is preliminary. And this is the place to start though. You have to kind of take a look before you move on to humans in animals. Here's a really important thing to point out. What were they actually giving them? They were saying fish oils. And what they were trying to do is that they were trying to mimic what's called a cyclical diet. Maybe humans don't eat fish every single day, but maybe they could eat every third day. And that's what they did. They basically did 2 days of standard diet, and then they fed them the high fat diet. But let's take a little closer look into this. The standard diet, that was high in plant-based omega-3, so things like flax oil. But the intervention diet, this was the one that they were fed with the high omega-3 diet. They were fed 47 grams of EPA and DHA combined per kilogram of body weight. Now that may seem very little to some people, but when you actually take a look at it, this is the equivalent of feeding humans 3,200 grams of EPA and DHA for a standard 50-pound, 68-kilogram person. Now, just as a reference, that's again 3,000 grams. As a clinician, based on all the evidence that is published to date in animal and human studies, most fish oils are dosed somewhere between 500 milligrams and around 3,000 milligrams. So that's 3 grams, not 3,000 grams. That is a huge difference. So that was the first thing that caught my eye. And that right away was like, that's a red flag. That's way, way, way higher than you normally would give any human. And that's really not in line with the evidence. And then the important thing is that they gave these mice sub-concussive blows. So it's supposed to mimic like getting hit in the head in a football game multiple times, banging helmets, or heading a soccer ball multiple times. And so that is something that is of interest. Do these types of sub-concussive injuries or little micro traumas actually have a detrimental effect? And they had 7 impacts over 9 days. And then the conclusions that they found was actually pretty shocking. And this is where those shocking news titles come in. Ultimately, they found that the blood flow that happens after a concussion was impaired, and some of the remodeling and repair, both on a blood flow and blood vessel perspective, as well as some of these pre-Alzheimer's like conditions like the tau proteins that have been linked to cognitive decline, they actually were promoted in these animals that had the repeated injuries, subconcussive, and were supplemented with fish oils at this massive mega dose. So of course, the influencers online pick this up and say fish oils dramatically impaired the brain's ability to repair after injury. Fish oils promote Alzheimer's-like brain pathology, and they looked at something called CTE, and in human cadavers, meaning dead people, they looked at their brains and they thought, you know what, there actually is this kind of connection to specifically that EPA component. When it gets depleted, it leads to this possibly CTE. And then the final nail in the coffin that really made me smile is that they kind of said, well, you know what, look at the evidence that already has been showing that omega-3s are bad for you. Like this one, this is a paper that is a letter, an opinion paper published in the Harvard Heart Letter in December of 2023, saying that there's no evidence that omega-3s improve cardiovascular health, which is just straight up a lie. It's not true. There is so much evidence showing that it decreases the risk of heart attacks, it decreases coronary events, and the whole new thing that omega-3s increase arrhythmias really is been, again, overblown. I've recently done some videos on that, showing that the most recent evaluation of the research shows that there's not an increased risk in arrhythmias. And so this was a pile-on, I think, when it comes to some of the omega-3 haters out there, and the study kind of set the table. So, you know, they did some good things. I do want to acknowledge that. They did try to look at cyclical feeding and the sub-concussive impacts, and they kind of pointed out that it was the EPA component, not the DHA. We know that DHA is the main component that's found in brains, and it's more structural, where EPA is more functional, like anti-inflammatory. So maybe the reduction of that EPA right after getting these sub-concussive events, maybe it's being used up. That's kind of the adaptive recovery piece. And the theory here from this paper is that the EPA impairs that adaptive recovery, which is really one of the first pieces of evidence that ever claimed that. And then finally looking at saying that it disrupted cognitive function. The big issues that I have, the big takeaways, is that the dose is just outrageously high. It's so high that we have no idea what these massive doses would actually achieve in animals and in humans. And I think this is a case of, if you have such a high dose, we have no idea what it would do. And it may actually increase oxidization. And I agree with that. I think that they should have found a dose that is in line with all the evidence that's been currently published. And I think that's the other big thing, is that the paper really ignores the bulk of the research that's been published. You know, there's two examples of studies right here that was published by Dr. David Ma and his group at University of Guelph. And they've done a number of animal models supplementing with omega-3s in reasonable doses in animal models to basically have enough research, enough positive research, to get almost $1 million grant to study this in humans. Because again, animal models are great as just like the initial step, but we want to study this in humans to really see the impact. And so I agree, more research is needed in humans, and there's enough evidence as far as all the key researchers in the world are concerned, and the funding agencies, to actually proceed to human clinical trials. So I'm excited to see what this new research is going to show. But little papers like this, I think, really take the dosing way out of context, and then you splash all the media stories and the headlines saying fish oil impairs recovery. Not really accurate. I think I'd like to see them redo the study with a proper dose, and then we can really see what the effect of fish oils might be in the case of these subconcussive injuries. If you want to learn more about concussions and omega-3s, I've done a video on this before, so click the link and check that out, and stay tuned for some more updates on omega-3 research.